Hello and welcome back to Crew Parley, the variant of the normal Parley videos we do in this channel, where people pay at the $9 a month tier and submit a prompt and then I make a video about it. This is a perk at the $5 tier where I submit a prompt and then you all put up a response about it. So this month my prompt was, hit me with your biggest quotes, phrases, sayings, and such. They don't have to be famous, I don't care who said them. It may very well just be something you think is useful, and I won't hold it against you if it doesn't apply universally or something. These don't need to be the building blocks of reality, just interesting, useful maxim type of things. Let's say 2 or 3 with a little explanation, or just 1 if you have a lot of explanation. Show me what you got. And show me what you got you did. This was one of the more popular Crew Parley so far. So there are 5 responses. I believe 5 different people responded, which is awesome. I made Crew Parley partly because there is such a large number of people at this tier who can use this perk, and so I just wanted something that a lot of people could participate in. And definitely I think one of the limitations right now is that I need to learn what to ask better, basically. It's not the same as a stream, but it's also not the same as a normal Parley prompt. It's kind of in between those two things, so I don't have that much practice asking something like this necessarily. One of the reasons I started doing Parley is because I think I'm good. I'm gonna confidently say, at responding to these types of prompts, not necessarily asking them myself. You know, we make discussion during the stream, but I have like 2 hours to just call and response with you all in live chat. You know what I mean? It doesn't mean I'm a social butterfly that can engineer a perfect discussion scenario. You know what I mean? That's not the same thing. So anyway, well, apparently it is, because you all did. It's all of you. Let's give you credit. That's why it's good. Your responses are great. So we're just going to do them in order. Starting with Just Rusty, who says, it doesn't matter. It don't matter. None of this matters, as a response to things not going your way, which I think is from Action Team Hunger Force. I never watched it, but my uni mate said it all the time and it stuck. It don't matter. None of this matters. There's also a lot I like from sports interviews. Why you have to be mad? It's only game. Yes, that one. And you think it be like what it is, but it do. And monkey never cramp. I think mostly because these are people who are paid to be the best in the world at their sport, not speaking. So they use turns of phrase no one with professional speaking training would ever use. Interesting. Yes, okay, now I get it, now that you say it that way. That's a good explanation. Right, and Aqua Teen Hunger Force, while I haven't seen, like, basically any of it, I know what that is. And that's kind of the vibe of that show, too, right? They're trying to say things off the cuff a little. There's this huge rabbit hole you can go down if you make YouTube videos of how your voice becomes this weird hybrid of presentational and how you'd normally talk. I think for me, one of the things that makes it really hard is that we talk about analytical or philosophical topics between my friends and I in my real life. And so if this is a good way to speak, to lay out an argument or, debate something, I mean, I do that in real life a lot too. So this kind of is my normal voice to some. I certainly talk like this a lot in normal life, but just only when, we're in that mode, I guess. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of talking out an essay, and so a certain cadence is good. But at the same time, I think it really helps the human brain get through a dense block of text or speech if you add some normal speechisms back in, or just let them in, basically. It's fine, but you can hear me saying, yeah, but, or basically, like I just said, adding those little side words in a little bit, or taking a moment just to elaborate a little, I think makes it more fun to talk through this stuff. And it's interesting to see when people, as you say, really aren't used to saying things like that. In fact, much of the time it makes the saying more effective. So the classic, why you have to be mad? It's only game, is the lightheartedness of the phrasing. It like is the sentiment. You know what I mean? That's great. And it is awesome. So I definitely get that. I think that the idea of what phrasing sticks to people is also pretty interesting. Something I've been doing for a while now. is the idea of kind of like New Year's resolutions adapted into something better, like themes or modes or chapters. I've heard them called. I've heard this idea a few different places, but my version of it is I think of them as themes. One place that I saw this presented, if you're interested, is CGP Grey has a video about yearly themes. Yearly, I don't really agree with that personally. And I also think season, which he recommends in that video, it's a good video, but I just think it's too short for a lot of these things. I do them more like 6 months or they're done when they're done. And I think for some people, having a deadline would be really important. So I would like to suggest 6 months. If you watch that video and think, but what amount of time will I do? I would like to suggest half a year. Anyway, what word works for those themes is quite esoteric. I have found, a lot of the time they sound, I think mine sound very edgy, and I'm embarrassed but happy to just do that with all of you. So, for example, one of my themes was it was decision annihilation at first, and sometimes I let them evolve. That's also a thing I think is valuable. So, decision annihilation one became, I made a separate document in my notes called decision annihilation, where I wrote down all the stuff that I wanted to annihilate and not have so many decisions hanging over my head. But eventually I realized that the problem was that there just really were a lot of things, and so it became the decision C, and I'm an idiot, and so to me decision C, decision, and then SEA, like an ocean of decisions, but then it became decision C, like one word, the decision C. I don't know, like Parliament or something. And that tickles me. I don't know why. That's stupid and doesn't make sense, but to me, that's just what sticks. It's the nonsense of it that kind of worked for me, I guess. The one I'm on right now is the original theme was strength, but it's not strength like, huh. I mean, that's fine, I guess. I'm lifting weights as part of it, but strength like the tarot cards strength, or like there's in JoJo season 3, where all the stands are based on tarot cards. We meet the strengths stand, and that's what it is in my head. I'm just a nerd, and that's what resonates with me. And again, I think it's the personal, on the human level nature that makes those things kind of click a little bit. Now, let's talk a little bit about the actual quotes, though I think most of your sentiment was that this way of quoting, this way of phrasing is interesting, effective, and I agree. Let's let's go back to the actual sentiments though, because I do have a little to say about them. So the first one, it don't matter, none of this matters. I do invoke this logical turn of phrase a lot myself. I will often argue to people that are like worried about trying a new thing or whatever. I will remind them, you don't, like, you're tasting a new coffee. It's here to be drunk. If you don't like it, you're not wasting it. It was never going to not be wasted. It's only here for somebody to try and play with their flavor experience. Sure, if there's someone right there that knows they really like it and you don't think you will, fine, maybe you would like give it to them, but I mean, if you're close, we could just portion some out and you can still try it. Nothing bad happens if you just try it and then end up not liking it. I mean, I guess something bad happens. You have a flavor experience. And some people really, really don't enjoy tasting something that they don't like, even politely, probably not like it's the end of the world, but they just really don't like that experience. It's not like they think it's vile sewage. There's just something about that experience they just don't like. That's fine, of course. But I think a lot of the time it's that people don't want to, I don't know what it is really, like want to indulge themselves or something. I've been picking at what this is for a while because people are weirdly resistant to having a completely free novel experience when in their day-to-day life they seem to crave absolutely nothing but a completely new novel experience. But then if you offer one to them, those strings attached, it's like hard for them to accept it, which I guess is why they're having trouble having one normally. But I've been trying to unpack that lately. And something I often say is, well, what are we here for? Basically, there's no, this is it. For you to not revel in these moments is the beginning of the end. You need to have a place where you just enjoy what's happening as things pass. That might not be how this quote is being said, though. It don't matter. None of this matters. Might be you know, take it easy. Don't worry about it. Don't feel like you need to do a thing, potentially. Sure. And I think people letting go of stuff like that can be just as valuable. But personally, the problem I've seen is that people seem kind of sticky to not trying things, even if they would say that's what they want out of their day or their life. So that's what it made me think of. Um, the why you have to be mad is only game thing is, of course, I mean, just not raging when you play a game. But I feel like sometimes that sentiment sidesteps the physiological and psychological fact that it's pretty obvious why people are mad, even though there isn't a good reason for them to be mad. It's neither is it mysterious why they're mad. It's quite obvious why they're upset. It's just not a good reason. But there's a very clear reason. They are getting their fulfillment in life from that thing. They're putting a lot of load bearing weight of their life on that event that they're doing, the sports ball or whatever. That isn't a good idea, you might say, but they are doing it. And so it's pretty obvious why to them it feels like a big deal. And they haven't processed through, I don't know, how big do you want to go? Mortality? Let's go back to the previous quote. It don't matter. None of this matters. Well, I mean, we do only live once, as the quote goes. So, you know, I can kind of respect when people get uppity about these things on a broader level. You shouldn't be treating other people badly when you're just playing a game. But on the other hand, it would be silly to not acknowledge that, I mean, they don't really feel like it's just the game. If you say you think it's just the game, right? They'll say yes because they know that socially they're supposed to respond that way. But it's fairly obvious outwardly that they don't really feel that way. No. And I think maybe that's worth exploring sometimes. Of course, very Zandy response. Uh, you should be mad. This isn't a game. This is your whole life. And I'm not saying that, of course. I try very hard when I play like video games with my friends. Usually, I'm the one encouraging people not to rage about something. Sometimes I get very frustrated because I feel like in my leisure time, a simple mistake is punished too heavily. Like this is something I rage a lot when I play like a battle royale game, maybe. And the reason isn't because I'm upset about the game at all. It's just because, like for example, you're playing a game and you do something you thought was a reasonable jump or whatever, but because of a slanted piece of geometry, you slide off the map and die. And not all games have this because that's not good. But in Apex Legends, you can do this, and that often really frustrates me inordinately. And my friends at first said, you're the one always saying, who cares? It's just the game. Why does that make you so upset? And the reason is that the game allows you to do a 1 second of mistake, and now a significant amount of your free time to relax during your evening after a day of trying something that was difficult for you, your work, whatever you're working on, can be robbed from you. I made one mistake for 1 second. I made a mistake while playing a game, sue me. And now a half hour of my free time is gone for doing that thing. That's just bad. Indeed, we stopped playing Apex Legends. I mean, it's not a problem just with Apex Legends. There's a lot of examples of this. But that, and you'll know if you play a lot of Battle Royale games, that design trend is on the decline. Like that's kind of going away. I think a lot of people have realized that just sucks. It's an interesting experience now and again, but on a basic level, a leisure activity that you relax with, it's just not good to be able to be deleted from that activity for a huge swath of time for like one tiny mistake. Now in Apex, you can revive people and the time to kill is like relatively higher, which I think is why it stuck for so long. I enjoy it when it isn't doing that thing. But anyway, so yeah, I don't know. Those are my main thoughts. I think it's very useful to think of things as, let's keep the stakes in mind here. But at the same time, it can be worth unpacking why people are upset about those things. My partner rages a lot. She plays first person shooters a lot, and she kind of took to this later in life. And she's playing Titanfall 2 multiplayer, which is pretty sweaty in my opinion. And when you look at people playing these games, it's like you're doing something quite amazing. If you mess up, it's not you're not like a bad person. It's really hard. And she'll, kill like 3 people and then die because, come on. And then go, oh, I can't believe I did that. And I go, you're like the Terminator, and you just complained about your performance. Like, what's wrong? And it's worth unpacking. Why? There are answers to these questions. So, excuse me. Wow. I got you're like the Terminator voice crack. Anyway, moving on to eye patch notes. YouTube creator Tantacruel, interesting, covers different aspects of music software and brought to my attention the Score notation app. Compared to other notation apps or even penning sheet music by hand, Score is nearly impenetrable by dint of its operation. Instead of a point-and-click interface, users had to type out multiple strings of code to define information that should appear on the score. Score was not built to be something that you could just pick up and intuitively use. Once you overcame the steep learning curve, you could produce scores extremely quickly. This is the equivalent of using the terminal or command line for everything instead of a GUI, a graphical user interface. That's wild, okay? In the field of user interfaces, the what you see is what you get model, WYSIWTG, that is not a good acronym in my opinion, but visually, okay, what you see is what you get. Yep, I've heard of this before, is common for image editing and video editing apps. Artists commit their change to the canvas and react accordingly. This introduces a level of skill where the user practices freeform inputs, for example, mouse movements and hotkeys, for the desired effect. Rejected. I am unwilling to carve in muscle memory for artistic techniques I'm not confident in. My Parley graphics are very that'll do by my assessment, drawn in by regular polygons and colors rather than polished technique. The Score app was particularly inspiring to me because it sounds like an app that I would make or use myself. Purely textual inputs are what I prefer at work compared to buttons and drop-down menus. My grand, glorious vision for a Pathfinder 1st Edition app will take after Score, belting out level-by-level character builds with lines of ad hoc code. See also Manim and the excellent videos on Motion Canvas for more text-to-video magic. Ooh, Motion Canvas, oh baby. Motion Canvas is really cool, yeah. It's a video animation software that is based on code, basically. This is something I've looked at a little bit. Again, the learning curve would be steep, so it's a non-trivial upfront cost to maybe add graphics to my videos with like no skill. So iPatchiness here is invoking the saying, the quote, the phrase that we're discussing is what you see is what you get design. And basically you're saying, no, screw that. Come on. What about something a little different? Yeah, I actually agree with you, which might surprise some people. While I think there's a lot of value in just like direct, intuitive interfacing, of course, because it allows a person who has a skill to utilize a tool in kind of a new way. Its drawback, obviously, is that people who aren't already good at it, you've made something that has the capability to simulate an ability people don't have, but set it up in a way where it can't do that. You made a software that can draw images. It can create images even if you can't draw them. It can make a circle, a perfect circle, even if you can't make something close to a perfect circle by drawing it by hand, obviously. But it's set up in a way where it does not emphasize that functionality. You see the problem? While obviously that's beneficial if you are good at drawing and you want to use a software that can also make a perfect circle, can make these colors, digital illustration programs are obviously very useful when they're what you see is what you get style. Obviously that's very useful. But at the same time, the program kind of can allow you to make really good graphics if you couldn't make them by hand, but isn't set up to emphasize that functionality, you might say, I would say. And these technologies, Score and Motion Canvas, are going the opposite way. They're trying to set it up in a way where if you couldn't have done the skill the previous way it existed, we've now made a new way that you can accomplish this task that you might be able to do even without that technical skill. Pretty cool. Now, I admit that for things like the Pathfinder 1st Edition thing you described, I do have some quibbles. I guess to me, it feels like to some extent, some of these activities, the activity is like going through it. You know, I'm looking forward to seeing when you make that. What do you feel like the benefit of it is? Basically, just like spitting out builds really, really fast, or you don't have to note down all this stuff with builds. I could be open to that being useful, but I feel like that is something a little bit different. It just speeds up a very, very specific action. Not saying that's bad, obviously, macros, you know, but whereas motion canvas and score open up the possibility of adding a form of visual value to a piece of media you're creating that you wouldn't have been able to create otherwise or in a timely manner. I when I was in middle school, I we had a really, really good art department because I went to a fancy private school. I really don't think this was the greatest choice. No offense to my parents, they don't watch these, but they do watch some of my videos. My mom does, and she knows I feel this way. But it's kind of a mixed bag, you know. It was a little, I guess, like sheltering, or it's an unrealistic view of, like to be blunt, childhood. But it's what happened to me. And so in middle school, when I was in like sixth or seventh grade, the private school I went to goes from kindergarten, first grade, second grade, etc., through eighth grade, which is really weird, I know. And I was in the same school that whole time. That had its benefits, I guess. But um, as you might expect, the humanities at that school were pretty fancy. You know, like the art department was really good. You could get a lot of materials to do the art with for free. Well, it's hardly free, but you know what I mean, like included, I guess. At the time, it was pretty amazing to me that you could just go use huge amounts of pretty expensive artistic supplies, and that most students did not do this. I had a very, very unartistic class in middle school. I remember that very well. I went every day for a few years after school because I got fixated on, I want to be good at drawing. Probably sixth and seventh grade, and then I kind of dropped it in eighth grade because I realized I'm about to tell you. But for a little while, I tried really hard. And while doing that, only like two or three people besides me out of my class of, I want to say it was like 80 or so people, ever went to the art studio, which is insane. Now, those two or three people that went were crazy. Don't get me wrong. Maybe that's why other people didn't go. And sometimes their friends would show up and take a look. Yeah. But one of those two or three people was my best friend because I encouraged him to give it a shot. You know, that I don't know if that he was actually pretty good, but that doesn't, I don't know if that really counts. I bribed him, you know. But yeah, me and then there were two other like crazy, phenomenally skilled. I'm sure they went on to be masterpiece level artists. I, in that time, drew about three things because I couldn't get over trying to make them just so. I tried to draw an armadillo for one of them. It was a picture book picture of an armadillo, not a exactly real life armadillo, but a fairly realistic looking armadillo. And I spent forever, like literally forever, like 6 months, you know, maybe an hour every day after school, which is an absurd amount of time if you realize hundreds of hours, literally hundreds of hours, trying to get like all the little sections of its armor or you know whatever you want to call those plates, just so basically. Which it's interesting that my teacher or the head of the art studio at the time didn't tell me not to do that, but she always watched very carefully. Like, is this kid gonna be okay? And I was not okay. I mean, you can't, and you can see this in me as a person now. I've really tried to tackle this perfectionism thing, but the point is, you know, it's not like I can't do that. It came out pretty good in the end, but that amount of time is like you will fail to live your literal whole life to produce that one image. And I've said many, many times, I just thought that was a fun anecdote, but I've said many times when discussing my own video making process that I think a lot of people who put a lot of editing into their videos really, really enjoy editing. And that's like they wanted to do that. They want to make art using editing. Joey Zero is friend of the channel, is a great example of that, as far as I can tell anyway. It's what he says. But I think that just as many, if not more people, spend a lot of time editing stuff into their videos, but they don't want to. They just think that's like what you do, or like that's what you need to do. And I think if you were to turn it around and say, think of what you could gain if you didn't put those things in. You know, I think of, there's a D&D animation channel I like. Z Bashu, I think is the channel name, but you'll probably know it as the animated spellbook if you've seen it before. It's pretty cool. You go take a look if you want. They're humorous, kind of demonstrative though, like videos about individual spells in 5th edition D&D that have animation on top of them. And the animation is really cool. I'm not saying that's a bad part of the videos, but when you look at it the other way and say, think about how many times we could hear his delivery if they didn't need to be animated. We could have like 10 times as many videos, you know, and for some people they might say, well, but I want them with the animation. Okay, but you see what I'm trying to say. For a lot of topics, for a lot of approaches to subjects, the benefit just is not there. Obviously, the ideal, though, would be to have it all, would be to use motion canvas and get graphics demonstrating the abstract subjects I'm discussing in my videos without sacrificing the time to, you know, make them by hand, if I could get used enough to motion canvas. And perhaps at some point I will. But personally, I still feel like in many cases the games themselves have good enough, you know, examples of these things. And I still feel like the drawback is there. Again, with things like motion canvas and score, I feel that these attract a type of user that's why I'm going on so long about this, like, what exactly is the trade-off? You know, is that a thing that's useful there? Because for my topic, for example, if I were to put motion canvas graphics into my videos, the purpose of discussing the piece of game design is that it is in the game, is that there is a build system that you can see that really is a significant part of the experience. If that is not demonstrable using the game footage, obviously there are exceptions to this, but there is some extent to which you could say, is it a big part of the game if it's that hard to show people? Does that make sense? Now, certainly, I've seen some examples of discussing game design in games where there was an abstract enough part of the game that a graphic really helps. Of course. I don't know. Personally, I feel like one good thing about build systems as a topic is that the game often has a screen that is a graphic for the build system. That's like what it is. A GUI for like the code you're typing in kind of already exists. A game's build screen kind of is motion canvas for the game's build systems to an extent. So I don't know, and I could see someone really over-engineering it. That's certainly not something I've done, but I'm absolutely open to the idea that some soft graphicking would add things here and there. I'm basically just making the argument that the preventing yourself from being able to add these features sometimes actually keeps things focused in a way I think is valuable, and people who have the ability to add these touches often go like way too far, whether they actually want to or not, whether it's actually useful or not. It often is, but I think a lot of the time it isn't. It's not a criticism of you, iPatch Notes. I think if anything, you're actually doing the exact thing I just recommended. iPatch Notes Parley often have a little graphic iPatch Notes is put together for a key concept in the Parley. And I think you get a huge amount of mileage out of these with very lightweight production. You know, you make them out of geometric shapes and put the text in and use them as a key idea for the Parley, and that's it. A lot of value, a little graphicking. Perfect. You know, that's like my ideal is basically what I'm describing. But as somebody who's gone, I guess I just told you that armadillo anecdote to demonstrate that I have tried going like crazy on illustrating, and I have a lot of questions about the value of doing so. Anyway, very, very interesting though. I think the idea of like making things a GUI approach, what you see is what you get approach versus you don't. is interesting. And in a way, I totally get you. It asks some questions about we've made these tools that can kind of automate or create art, for example, in a way that only really helps people that can already do it, you could almost say. And while that's not a bad thing, there's also a question about, I mean, they have the capability to let people that can't make those things make them. Is that not relatively a little more valuable? And I would say, yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, I think, but they can be harder to learn, of course. Next one is from, that's Bionic Me, right? Yes, I believe so. Bionic Me, whose quote is, if you like a piece of media, that's good. Eventually, you'll more or less, if you like a piece of media that is good, eventually you'll more or less run out of things to say about how good it is. But if you like a piece of media that is objectively pretty mediocre, but also somehow deeply compelling, that's how the demons get you. A stray Tumblr post that may not exist anymore. I could list a good number of things for which this rings true to me, and one or more of them is the reason I will be willingly submitting a Parley prompt proper this month, with possibly more to come. I put in the... Where's... You didn't write willingly. I misread that. Sorry. You held at gunpoint. I will submit a Parley prompt. The reason you will be submitting a Parley prompt proper this month. Excuse me. Actually, I will give in to the demons and list a few. The animes Air Gear and Yu-Gi-Oh!, as well as the actual card game Yu-Gi-Oh! Itself, the video games Sunless Sea, Black Desert, and the Dark Souls trilogy, with each entry having its own significantly differing flaws. I'll avoid elaborating more, ought not to indulge the demons too much. Okay, so just the pause. So those are examples of things where you think that they're objectively pretty mediocre, but somehow deeply compelling, and that's how you get really sucked in. It's certainly true that many people other than you have gotten very sucked in to some of these things. I am going to say something maybe controversial to some people. I agree with you about Dark Souls. I think it's pretty clear that Dark Souls is not so good in a vacuum. It's doing something focused that people really wanted at the point in history when it came out, and it's doing that thing adequately well while being just so particular. I don't know. It's like if you listen to interviews from the people who made Dark Souls, you'll hear that they had these really unifying design philosophies, like making the difficulty not come from operating the game. Everything is clear. It's just like hard to do, but you know what you need to do, and the controls don't make it hard to do that thing any harder than it otherwise would be. You know, it's just about timing is one way you could say it. Now, if you play through or watch a ton of the Dark Souls games, as I've played through a little bit of all three of them and watched a lot of them. I had a friend in college who played through all three of them while I just like did my English homework in the background. If you play through those games and then think about that thing that the designers said they did, that the difficulty not be derived from operating the game, that's not true of the Dark Souls games. I would argue they didn't actually do that, but it's interesting that they would say that was their design philosophy. And is that maybe what is so compelling? That the game is like consistent and knows what it's about, but not necessarily in a way that is all that great, just something very particular. And again, if I'm historically correct and people liked these things because they were doing a thing that people wanted at that time, like crunchy, difficult gameplay, but in a way that a lot of people can pick up and play. At a time when game design was kind of stagnating with difficulty. And they just did that thing in a very focused way, but that is not the same as the game being like good overall game design. I don't particularly think that they are, especially like well or poorly designed game. They're unremarkable in terms of overall quality, but there are some parts that are amazingly focused, and also, again, it's very focused. That's just my 2 cents. Is that maybe why people get so sucked in? Yeah, I can kind of get down with it. Okay. Bionic Me, you gave a few counterexamples. To give an example of the opposite, I recently pulled up Netflix to check out the latest season of Arcane, but was distracted by a glance across an anime I'd watched a couple of years ago and since almost forgotten, and decided on the spot to give a rewatch. I ended up concluding that it's probably among one of my favorite shows ever. Yet as I'm writing this, a scant week later, that show has occupied my thoughts much less than almost objectively worse media that I haven't actually engaged with for in months or more. Sure. So definitely I have a lot to say about that though. Definitely I get where you're coming from. You know, there if it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of mentality comes in. And when you're watching something that just works, it's like there's almost not much to say. Whereas you could see how something that has its strong points and is very focused, but then has all these little there's all these little weird details is what gets people sucked in. Sure. Now, I don't mean to be argumentative. I actually feel the exact opposite way, and it really frustrates me that people get so into things that I would have been more harsh and not said it in the positive, I think better way that you formulated it. I feel like people are more interested in things that they think are worse because they don't appreciate things that are better in a different way. That's my very critical, very judgmental way of saying it. So we're going to have a bit of a showdown about those two ideas. Because I think you're absolutely right that this is a phenomenon that occurs, but I do not think that it is a fundament of human psychology. Like, I don't think you have to think this way or it's innate to think this way. I think it's just very common that people think this way. And I think it is a very good thing, if you're interested, to gain the ability to focus on the good things more, which you can do. I'm going to be self-centered and argue that I can have done this. And I think I know how, so that's good. I'll try to say why. But there's a central argument here, so I want to present it. It sounds good, right? You can focus more on the things that are better. That's good, right? Well, I mean, getting more into the objectively pretty mediocre but also somehow deeply compelling things does things more, if that makes sense. Like, there's something to be done about them, you might say. You can learn from them. You can make the same thing but better. You can figure out what you would like in the same way but even more. Whereas you could go so far as to say, you enjoy something a lot. You just enjoy it. It's really good. And if you gain the ability to focus on those things more, what exactly does that do to benefit you? I mean, you can go get more of it, I guess, but to some extent, let's use my classic example. You're drinking some delicious tea, and you gain the ability to focus more on the delicious good tea, where it's like no notes, it's great, but you somehow, I'll talk about it in a minute, focus more on that tea. I mean, what are you gonna do? Just buy more of it? You could just do that. Who cares? From an action or call to action perspective, it seems like kind of a fail. Does that make sense? It seems better, maybe more profitable, maybe even to for you as a person, not just money, to focus on the things that are a little mediocre but have their strengths, and then you could focus on those things. You could argue there's more to learn, there's more to gain by focusing on those things. But I don't entirely agree. I think that the main benefit of my thesis is going to be that the main benefit of focusing more on the positive thing is that there is a mental sanity or mental health gain where the world becomes filled with good things and you're not constantly stymied or kneecapped by things that are like disappointing is how I feel. But I guess I'm just a very negative person, because you could totally look at it a different way and say, well, but it's so interesting. I definitely show this weakness as a person when we talk about game design. I'm so fixated on the mistakes, and it's like, well, we live in an era of gaming where you can patch the game. And so you could say, well, but you could always fix the mistakes. Yeah, but they're not going to. And so what's yeah. Whereas to be fixated on mistakes and then embrace the things that are just really, really good, there's almost no notes. And then you find more of them, or you can revel in them more. But is that just an anxiety with acknowledging mistakes? Sure, but I'm just saying I think there are benefits to focusing this way. So let's break them both down. Yeah, but that's my thesis, basically. I think it is better in some ways gain the ability to focus on the things that are like just better, basically, or that you think are just better, that you like more. But there are definitely pros and cons. Like I'm not of the opinion that it's like common but bad to focus on the things that are mediocre but deeply compelling. I think there definitely are benefits to that. It's arguably better, but I think there's an argument to be had. Yeah, I mean, Black Desert Online, that's an interesting one. I don't remember enough of Black Desert to say, but I do remember a lot of Arcade. Arcade is a whole enigma that we won't get into too much, but it's a massively multiplayer online role playing game that a boyfriend of mine in college got me into, and he like really got me into it. That was very fun. We spent a lot of time just trolling people or like being underdogs, I guess, in the game's incredibly aggressive PvP. You can make a lot of money by running trade packages. You gather some materials together, you put them in a trade pack, you put them on your vehicle. You can build all sorts of vehicles to haul trade packages, or on a boat, and then you cross the seas, and or the land you drive, and try to deliver your package. But there are two factions in this game, and the other faction can absolutely kill you and literally take your money. Oh yes. They can loot your package and deliver it themselves, and they get even more money if they do so. A nice little incentive. If you can get the packages, it is definitely more efficient to steal them than to run them yourself. But obviously, if like nobody's there, and it just takes a long time in real life, but like some people that might be relaxing, it's like a truck driving simulator, but you can get mugged. I guess that's not the whole game, of course. It's otherwise like a normal MMO, I suppose, but this is a significant part of it. And for the longest time, I played this build where you had this ability where you telekinesis someone into the air and you can move them around very slowly. Ah. As you can see, I don't really recommend Black Desert Online. Be talking about it is making me sleepy, but you can't move. They can't move. It's unresistible, and it lasts like 5 or 6 seconds. It's really, really good if you want to hold someone still and then your friends mug them, or you can telekinesis them off a cliff, drop them. Though they might have a movement ability that will get them back on. There's a pretty popular ability that's like a backflip, and if you do that, face your camera toward the cliff, away from the ground, and hit the backflip ability right when the telekinesis wears off, you can, and people often did, like, get back onto the cliff. But then I knew you were going to do that, so you put down the area of effect spell where they're going to land, and then you get them. Yeah. Anyway, and there's push abilities. You just push them back off. And I sucked at this game, and this game is really pay to win. I mean, there's a new version that they say isn't that pay to win, and I haven't played that. But at the time, it was very pay to win. So I'm not going to beat anybody in a fair fight, which, I mean, it's very well. We'll just beat them in an unfair fight. So we spent a lot of time playing that way. And you can see it happening, right? It was compelling because it was bad. Well, it wasn't good. Listen to what I talk more about this than I talked about, I don't know, what's something I liked during. You mentioned Arcane. I think that's good. I have some plot structure like quibbles, but it's minor complaints. Yes, this truly is $2.5 million, is what I thought. Watching $250 million, is that the meme? An insane amount. When that one guy became the space Jesus, you know what I'm talking about if you've watched Arcane. When he became the space Jesus, yes, it truly is the taste of $250 million. Sips liquid gold. Yeah, sure. I talked more about Arcade and its pay to win garbage than Arcane, a thing I actually like. Now I'm doing that on purpose for this example. I could talk about Arcane more, according to me. Arcade, sure, I can talk about it more. I mean, this is my job, so I can talk. Looks at the time on the recording. I could talk about any of these things for a super long time, but I'm just not going to for those. I think it's more productive to give this example. It's compelling because it created a unique experience. We're not trying to argue that people just get fixated on things that are mediocre but deeply compelling in some way. I'm going to try to bolster maybe your argument, Bionic Me. I think it is more fun, more involved, more of a life by default to have played those experiences because they wiggle into your memory. You know, a big challenge in life, and one of my building up, it's probably going to be my next theme, as I talked about a few earlier, is the phrasing in my head right now is equilibrate struggle. The idea is that you, I guess some quotes of my own, that you find a way to call to the idea that struggling with things is good, fun, pleasant, good for you, but also like desirable in some way. You just need to hit the right balance somehow. And you'll have a tendency, if you have a life full of great things, which I think I'm very lucky. Well, most of it's because of me, but I mean, the world has those things and I collected them. So the reality gets some credit. Your life is full of good things, largely. I think I'm a well-off person who has fun things to do, as much as my work has been a struggle for the past year. Equilibrate struggle, finding a way to have it be that there is an amount of resistance that can be enjoyable, that can be healthy with your enjoyment, makes for a more lived human life, makes you have more full memories. I definitely agree about that to a point. Again, we'll get back to my overarching argument in a minute. I think that Arcade was more fun because it was a pile of garbage, like a lot of the time. Because it was pay to win, I had more fun than I would have had if it was less pay to win. It just would have been a grind fest otherwise, you know? By abandoning the idea that I could be as powerful as the other players and fight on equal footing, and instead use the game's really interesting, we'll have to get into it some other time, build system, to counter them instead, I had more fun. It was more fun. It wasn't better. It's not a better game, but that was somehow deeply compelling, as you put it. Absolutely. So don't get me wrong. I agree with you in that sense. However, my opinion is that just too many things in the world are this way. Almost everything is this way. And I don't think that almost everything being equilibrate suffering is good for you. Like, I think it's too much. We live in a world where the way I thought of it when I was younger, and I think this is still useful, is that we live in a world where our bodies and minds are designed for moment to moment, hour to hour, day to day input. But our entire society is built around you never, ever, ever accomplishing anything in the moment. And video games could be considered to be a sort of therapy, a balm to that existence. Something where you do a thing and experience bar immediately go up. This has been framed as kind of hacking your dopamine and getting a little addictive. And certainly I think it is for a lot of people. But to recontextualize it, it's definitely healthy to get some immediate fulfillment. The problem with people doom scrolling on their phone is that they get too much immediate fulfillment. Not that they get immediate fulfillment. It's good to get some immediate fulfillment. I'm sure you can see where this is going. So provided that you find a way to equilibrate suffering and get something in your life that is the struggle, but there's enough of an equilibrium, there's enough of a payoff, and you get something in your life where you get immediate gratification, but not too much, that is better. And I think for most people, the ingredient missing is the more balanced gratification, not the more, equilibrated suffering activities. People's jobs, or like doing the dishes, taking a shit, a shower or whatever, eating, preparing food, cooking. These are things that equilibrate suffering pretty well, in my opinion, for a lot of people anyway. I don't know your pooping life, but not trying to brag. However, I don't think a lot of people have very many things that are good. Like you get the fulfillment now, but not too much. So let's take tea, for example. You enjoy sitting with your tea, and you get your hot water ready, and you get your tea, and you sit down with your tea. On the basis of it having caffeine alone, many people, many of you, cannot have more than like a few servings, a few goes of your tea or coffee or whatever. You drink a cocktail, provided that you have a responsible relationship with drinking. Most people won't be comfortable drinking more than like one or two drinks. They just won't want to. I think it's ideal not to. 1, 2, or 3. I don't know. Again, I don't know your life. Certainly, it's not exactly the same for me, but you're naturally a little limited. Your tea, you'll sit down with your tea, you'll brew through your tea, and that just takes an amount of time too. Again, you could argue that this is actually equilibrating suffering rather than a instant gratification activity. But you do a thing and then you immediately get the payoff from it. And it's purely satisfying on premise. You don't really have to struggle to do anything, but you do some basic mechanical things to get there. There's a short walk to the tea house that you like. Yeah. And so you're not just going to like walk to another one. There probably isn't another one. You're not just going to have more tea. You might not be able to drink more tea and go to the bathroom enough times in the day, stuff like that. There's some kind of inherent limiter that encourages you to enjoy it now, get whatever you want, but just not too much. Okay, so finally we've come back to my argument for trying to get yourself to be able to focus more on the things that are just good and revel in the positive qualities of them. How you do that, I'll briefly discuss in a second, but it's not really the topic of this crew parlay, so I'll just touch on it briefly. We could talk about it some other time. The reason I think it's good is because what you've done is draw out that instant gratification to prevent it from being habitual, addictive, negative behavior, your doom scrolling or whatever. And so it can fill that time and make it enjoyable if you can get a bit more into that rather than going wide, more instant gratification, go deep, more in the other direction, instant gratification. I don't know why I'm pointing down at my crotch. I'm up. I don't know. You get to talk about it more. What am I even talking about? How do you enjoy it more? Basically, I'm just suggesting having language for it. I think basically the reason why the objectively pretty mediocre but somehow deeply compelling media is more discussed, besides that, like, that is legitimately more of an experience by default. I think it's more of an experience by default because it's easier to discuss. It's literally just easier to say, like, this is the thing that was bad, done. If the thing is good, you taste the tea and you like it. You have to acquire language for saying what you liked. You, by default, it's like, it's good. Like, for many people, I feel like I'm detecting that this experience is just the lack of something negative. It's actually not something positive for a lot of people. I don't know if I'm crazy about this, you tell me, but it's not for me. I mean, I'm tasting a bunch of positive qualities I could name, but it would be easy to forget. No, I learned to do that. That's not how it was by default. And I think it's beneficial to learn to do that. I think I really do enjoy it more if you learn to do that. But it requires the learning to do it. Is this interesting thing that they say in, it's really popular in the coffee drinking community, I've found, but it would apply to basically anything you really enjoyed. Food is, I think, a great example. People say eventually you have your really good coffee or whatever, and you stop enjoying it. You'll see these posts if you go to the coffee subreddit. People go, I don't enjoy my coffee anymore, You enjoy cooking, but it just gets boring to make this dish that you made and it's perfect and you love it, but now you just don't want to eat it, every night or whatever. People get bored of this. That sounds normal, right? And I think the twist that people often give, what I hear, is go have the bad version again to remind yourself how good the version you have is. And it's like, wait, why would you need, I can't relate to this experience at all. Why would you need to remind yourself how good it is? Don't you like get into how good it is? Maybe no. Maybe people are in this mode where it's easier to focus on the objectively pretty mediocre but somehow deeply compelling things. And they haven't gotten to the point where it is easier to talk about the just good things. It can be, just as easier with habit, with practice, to indulge and really enjoy the really good things. I think I have deleted this problem. I don't know. That sounds very arrogant, but maybe other people just haven't tried that much. So that's what I'm suggesting. Now, how do you do that? I mean, yeah, again, like getting verbiage for these things. You drink your tea, cover up the tasting notes, try to say what you think, just a few words, and then just look at what they said and see, do you disagree? Like, you can get into it a little. Is this a sweeter tea? Does it have texture to it? What kind of tea do you want at what time? Like, how do you choose which tea to have? gaining some different options, or spending your time getting through different versions of this thing you like. You know, buy a bunch of samples, buy another round of samples focused on what you liked from that previous set of samples, get a full tea cake of a tea that you really liked, then use that as a reference point. Now you've got like a daily driver, use that as a reference point for the other samples. This process alone that I just described could take people years, and yet I think a lot of people who'd say they're really into these things haven't done that yet. And that's not bad. I mean, you have something to look forward to. But like, you can walk further along the path of something that's just really good. I guess that's all I really have to say. I feel like I seem to have come out, you could imagine I came out really strong against this quote Bionic Me, but no, I think it's brilliant, really. I just have something to add. I think you can also focus like just as much on the things that are, you know, just good. And I tried to explain why I think this situation is the way it is. What a great quote to have suggested. You're absolutely right. And I like the objectively pretty mediocre, somehow deeply compelling thing quite a bit. A very nice formulation that you found on a stray Tumblr post, as you said. Okay, last one is from True Parley, Grandmaster Foot. I want to mention two unrelated quotes. By the way, hey, good job sticking to just a limited number of stuff, folks. You did a really good job sharing the air. That was very good, just very impressed. I want to mention two completely unrelated quotes. Mr. Foot starts. The first one is, "Physics is like sex. Sure, there are practical applications, but that's not the reason why we do it." This quote is usually attributed to Richard P. Feynman, the Nobel Prize-winning physicist, when in reality there is no source to support that. Before I say anything else, I'd like to mention that RPF is a man with a baffling legacy. There's an equal amount of hero-like worship and mostly founded allegations against this guy. He's most famous for his autobiography that he didn't write. I know how that sounds, and I'll not get into the details. In all that his actual contributions to physics got lost. What I actually like about RPF is something related to the wrongly attributed quote. When you listen to recordings of his interviews, when you listen to his lectures, he manages to get you excited about science because he is excited to think and talk about it. One thing that has saddened me in my personal life to no end is the reactions I get when people learn that I chose to study physics. There's a certain joy in understanding how the world works, a moment of temporary bliss that you cannot quite get anywhere else. And the inability or unwillingness of most people to feel that for whatever reason makes me sad. And this quote is one of the better attempts that I've seen to convey this whole idea. Physics is like sex. Sure, there are practical applications, but that's not the reason why we do it. Okay, let's pause with this one because you've got one more. Really cool. I thought that was a really good way to express, yeah, like the point of that quote, basically, how you applied that quote. You all kind of did that to some extent. I thought that was cool. Like, how do you use this maxim or quote? Great, just great. This is a very, very good one. And because of all of you, you did great. Sure, yeah, I can really relate to that, Mr. Food. For a moment about the thing about people not being willing to be excited about it. You said the inability or unwillingness of most people to feel excited about physics, but like most things that they're not already into, basically. I have a real bone to pick about this. First of all, it's definitely an unwillingness. I believe there is no such thing as an inability to be excited about it. Because the things that are exciting about many areas of life, study, many interests are fundamentally similar things. There's no way you would be unable to be excited by video games. That's not possible, according to me. So sure, I'm going to be accusatory. People are unwilling to, they're failing to. They could, but they don't. It's not that they can't. They could, but they don't or won't. So why? Like, what is it? You know? And they could. So how can you get them to? There is something you could say that would make them excited about it, but we just don't know what that thing is. And so, like, what is it? A joke or getting them into it a little more? Sure. But why don't people want to get into it more, though? I'm tempted to derail the entire parlay and talk about this, but I won't. I will just briefly comment that it's certainly something I've experienced a lot in my own time. I think for a lot of people, it is a survival mechanism or limitation instinct, I don't know, where they don't want to overwhelm themselves. Something I can certainly relate to a lot, but I feel like people do that without it being a problem. It's a rare case where people who, in my experience, often do not preempt problems before they happen. They only respond to a problem that's already started. People are preempting something they expect to be overwhelming, but they don't actually check if it will be ever for most of their life, and thus miss out on a lot of enjoyment that they could enjoy for basically no cost, for all they know. Don't get me wrong, a lot of the time you breach a subject with someone and they just go crazy. They're not experienced with limiting it or knowing when they don't have to limit it. I mean, I'd still limiting it, but like to a point. And so you're going to get a novel out of just bringing up a simple topic of conversation. Sure, of course that happens, but at the same time, I mean, to do this, a big thing I think a lot of people do that it would be good if you didn't, is that they continue that behavior even with people they know very well and have good reason to not be worried about. They don't turn that behavior off for people they're closer to, basically. A really brutal way I'd formulate it is most people treat their spouse the same way they treat their most distant acquaintance at the end of the day, which is a really huge missed opportunity. I hope we can agree. I think a lot of people do not fundamentally treat people different based on who they are or what kind of person they are. And this is highly inefficient, is putting it mildly. You could gain much from not doing that. Don't do that. I don't know. Again, we're not in the business of giving you advice about every single one of these things, but I well could. I guess we're just not doing that in this parlay. So I definitely relate to the sentiment behind this frustration that this quote maybe attempts to solve. That it can be funny, basically. That it can be fun. That the premise of the subject is that it is fun for you. I think a lot of people think that people who get into anything technical, basically, just want to feel smart or like no minutia, basically, when it's not like that isn't true necessarily as much as just, but the goal is fun. I think a lot of people just legitimately don't realize that or need a reminder, basically, of that. And for like another example, I guess you get into like when we talk about video games, something that's worked for me really well. If I'm talking about video games to someone who doesn't really know anything about them because they live in a Cold War bunker or something, I show them my video game spreadsheet that I made for all of you for the Discord for work. That is a list of most of the games I've played and how I've played them and what I think of their build system if they have one and overall and etc. Right? I show them that. And I show them it with the framing that this is overwhelming. Like, this is overwhelming. It's a lot. It's not like, to me, this is normal, and you think this isn't normal, and then you immediately assume we're just different. It's like, no, we're the same about that. I think it's overwhelming too, but you just can do these things. To try to get people to not do the thing where they treat other people who have a proficiency in a thing like they're magic and have magic powers and can do a thing in a way that they can't do. No, you could do this the same way I did. You just didn't do it. And acknowledging that is a point of maturity that makes a lot of people uncomfortable, but it's nothing to be uncomfortable about. We all do these crazy things at some quiet moment in our lives or in a loud way in public. And it's not any more or less incredible between people. People aren't that much more amazing than each other in that way, in my opinion. It's just that for some people you won't see, or they didn't record the moment where they like really involvedly got into something. And so the idea that you can use quotes or like turns of phrase as a way to kind of get people in to a subject that they absolutely could, yes, they could appreciate, but they just like don't think they want to, basically, and you can kind of invite them in. I think this is a potentially very good thing and a way that you can talk about yourself and eliminate the accursed small talk without like leaving people behind and just talking about something they don't have a way to engage with. Another really simple example for me is when I talk about video games. I mean, it doesn't have to be video games, it's just mostly video games. I'll say, well, what board games have you played? Monopoly. You've played Monopoly. what do you think of the game design of Monopoly? And they'll say, well, I don't know what that is. And I'll say, well, I mean, do you find Monopoly fun? Why do you think you find it fun? Like, does a group of people with you find it fun? And they'll say, like a common response, they'll say yes because we're playing it with the family. They don't think of it as a game at all. It's just the really unfortunate way a lot of people use games. It's like as an excuse to spend time with people they want to spend time with. You can have good game design and still spend time with the people you like. There's no need for it to be a badly designed game. But unfortunately, that's, I think, what a lot of people have. And so I'll say, okay, yeah, but like, does anyone get a bit uppity about Monopoly? And they'll say, now that you mention it, yeah, here we go. Yeah. You have experienced game design, you just don't know. But I know that you have, and you just got to find it. And then that was I remember I had that real conversation with someone, and it was a great conversation. It was hilarious. And their comments on game design, as someone who doesn't even think about game design, were just brutal, and it was great. I had a very good time. So, sure, I'm definitely into this. And what could be more true than physics being like sex in that there are practical applications, but that's not the reason why we do it? Well, it's the reason some people do it. But anyway, one more quote. Mr. Fruit, you said the previous quote was for me, but the other quote is for you. For me, okay. A quote that has refused to leave my head for the past 11 months. It's from John Wick 4, which I haven't seen. I watched the first 3 and really enjoyed them, but then John Wick 4 hasn't rotated to a streaming service that I'm willing to pay for. And it goes as follows. How you do anything is how you do everything. I think this one is pretty self-explanatory. Thoughts? Yes, I agree. I think this one is like obvious in a way once you get into thinking through people. Something that makes me quite mad as a person is that people think they aren't like this, but they will show you that they really are a lot of the time. An example a friend of mine we're joking about is so she's a head veterinarian at a veterinary clinic, and she wants employees to basically punch out, type in their notes or whatever for the day, and then type in the time they left work in a spreadsheet. But it's a spreadsheet, so people just become complete babies and say, oh, I don't know how to do that. And it's like, okay, to my fellow veterinary person, you are literally a veterinary surgeon. You do know how to type words into a spreadsheet. You cannot possibly have the level of intelligence required to do surgery and not be able to, like, just not freak out at the amount of words on the spreadsheet and, like, go to your section that's clearly marked and type I'm done for the day. Like, you do know spreadsheets. You can do spreadsheets. People don't universalize is the complaint I have. And I believe, again, much like the not having the joy in the thing from before, not seeing the joy in a topic, it's not that they can't, it's that they won't. There is an unwillingness to do the thing. There's a comfort in feeling like you can say, for any complex subject that isn't your specialty, you can say, that's not my area of expertise. And that's just like you're off the hook about thinking. But you will eventually realize, according to me and this, my friend, and possibly to Mr. Fruit, you will eventually realize that you'd be better off if you did think about that. You don't want to avoid thinking about that. You don't want an excuse to not think about that. You think you do, you don't. But whatever. I mean, it depends on the moment you are in life. You don't have to do it right now. You don't have to do it on my terms. But at some point, at the end of the day, this will all be pointless unless you decide you do want to think about that. And I find that to be a manifestation of this quote. How they do that thing is how they do everything. And they'll reject this. People will reject this. They'll say, when I'm drunk, I act different than I normally do. No, you always act in an avoidant or untactful way. And when you're drunk, the manifestation of that just changes, but it's the same you. And if you're a person who's gonna say the exact thing on your mind at any moment, when I'm drunk, I act identically as far as like what I say. I just maybe behave physically, motorics wise, in a different way, but the same stuff comes out. I'm the same way with everything. this way I'm acting in this one way is how I act with everything. Now, I think a big quibble I have with this idea that one action from a person, no matter what mode it's in, expresses them as a whole. The biggest problem, in my opinion, and the reason why you can't just meet someone and have one tiny interaction and reliably know them, there's two problems, but one of them is, I think, a lot bigger. It's that a lot of people haven't had time to propagate their philosophy to the rest of their life, basically. They fully intend to do everything in a way they've thought of, but it just takes time to adjust habits, and it takes a lot of time even if you have nothing to do but adjust the habit. And people don't have nothing to do but adjust the habit. They don't have time to propagate that way of thinking out toward everywhere. Thus they make mistakes or do things in a way they don't agree with, and they know they're doing it that way, but they just haven't yet accomplished the ability to do it the way that they, like, consciously and I believe unconsciously agree would be better. There's something other than them doing the action, basically. A lot of people don't get to spend a lot of their day doing things that are actually the way they would like to do it. It's kind of inertia, I guess I would say. And there's nothing to do about this, really. I guess we're all just too busy, and there's not a lot we can do about that. Another very different way to look at it is when you play League of Legends, there's this common idea that, the most fed player or the least effective player will determine the outcome of the match for all 10 people. And so only 1 out of 10 matches is actually you being evaluated, unless you pop off every single time or whatever. I hate this about League of Legends. If you kill someone in League of Legends, you get golden experience, and they don't because they're not alive. And so you're quickly swaying the match in the favor of whoever got the kill. The person who got the kill on the other player is now harder for the better players on their team to kill. The better players on their team who've managed to not give up resources to their lane opponents will now have a harder time killing that one player who got the kill in a way that they cannot have any input on. They can't do anything to prevent that from being the case. And so now, if they were a relatively even match, now they're going to lose, but it doesn't have anything to do with their skill. And there's nothing they can do to make it not happen, really. Not nothing, obviously, but unless you're extremely skilled at the game, that's how it is. And so judging how a match went for a given player, obviously if you look closely, you would see, it's because your lane opponent was fed or whatever. Of course, yes, but you see what I'm trying to say. It's a abstract example of only 1 out of every 10 actions is actually you, basically. I guess you could still use this quote if you could adjust for that. Just like how in League of Legends you could say, oh, well, but you losing that fight doesn't actually mean you're worse than that player. I can notice if I look closely that it's because their lane opponent was fed. You can do the same thing in real life. You encounter someone, your first interaction with them, anything is everything. So that's how they are, right? Well, hold on. Do they seem really rushed? Maybe this isn't how they would choose to act, but they don't have time to act the way they want to act. Well, but maybe them being rushed is anything is everything. They're always rushed. Okay? Well, you need to see a little more. Does that form a pattern, or were they kind of forced to behave that way by the very squishy situation in our society? So I think that's a big flaw for a lot of people living in practical everyday life. You cannot count everything that they've done, basically. They might be responsible for it. It might be caused by other things in their life, and thus you could say anything is everything. But I feel that this needs to be applied a bit judiciously. If people sit down and think and then perform an action, yeah, that's an anything is everything situation. They're doing that the way they would largely choose to do most things. And you might need to be abstract about it. Maybe if they make a more aggressive or risky choice, they wouldn't make an aggressive or risky choice for everything else, but they would make the choice in the same way. There might be some people who would make the aggressive and risky choice every time. Anything is everything. Or people who don't seem to be making choices the same way every time, but if you look closer, what's happening is the anything is everything is that they think through every single choice they make. And so they do this in a risky way, this in a cautious way, but they actually are doing those things in the same way. They're doing them in a thoughtful way, or a way adapted to the individual circumstances. You'll see this with me a lot. Not trying to brag, it's not necessarily better. I very consistently do things in what I perceive to be a utilitarian way, the way that gives them more utility. Now, I'm quite self-centered because I spend a lot of time trying to improve my life. And so a lot of the time, my evaluation is that I stand to gain the more utility in a situation. Many a time I've talked with friends, for example, and I'll say, oh, like, where do you want to go first? We're at a, mall or a, I don't know, I don't do that, but let's just say we were at a mall, I mean, sometimes I do that. And they'll say, oh, everyone says I don't care. And I say, well, I do care, so let's go here. If I'm the only one who says, well, I want to go to this place, and you all have places you want to go, but it's just like a bunch, then let's go to the place I want to go to. Sure. This doesn't actually happen that much, but just as an example. But that doesn't mean you'll notice that I frequently make decisions that don't benefit me in any way. They're just about the other person because I don't care. I want the more utility. Because because it comes back to benefit me, but absolutely. But the anything is everything might be abstract. Like, it might be impossible to see from the outside, I guess, is kind of like the other problem that I was getting at. Not as big of a problem. You can use it for yourself, potentially. But I think this is a useful way to think. I think it is a true thing about people that they have a sort of a key point in the way that they decide things, and they will consistently do these things. I think the big takeaway for me, a little similar to the previous quote, is that a lot of people seem to not know this, basically. Like, that they'll reject it if you say it, but it's often pretty obvious in my experience for a lot of people. And they don't notice it. In my experience, my theory is that a lot of people who don't notice it, they don't notice it because they think that it's the only sensible approach to that thing. So, for example, there's somebody I talk to frequently, and they always prevent generalizations and say, oh, well, we can't say for sure. And whenever we're discussing stuff like this, I always say, well, we're not forcing anyone to have this opinion. We're just imagining, if this generalization was true, then what might that mean? And we can't know if it's true, but we can't know anything. We're not telling anyone what their opinion about it is. We're just imagining if maybe that could be this way. I don't know. I'm not going to die on the hill of most people not being willing to open up about other people's interests. You might disagree about that. Fine, whatever. We don't know. Now, you don't know either. Neither of us knows. I'm not going to impose law about that reality without confirming it. If that was my job, I would try to confirm it, but it's not, and I don't need to confirm it. We can just imagine if that was true, and then see if the resulting conclusion might be effective, and then maybe you could try using it. We're not forcing anyone to be closed-minded. We're not deciding for people. We're not writing reality when we say, I think most people are closed-minded. If they aren't, no one gets hurt. It's okay. As long as you're open-minded about it, as long as you're willing to say, that's just what I think, and I don't know. And a lot of people aren't, but I mean, a lot of people are. The people you'd want to talk to are. And this person is incredibly consistently just adamant that we cannot ever generalize. You can't even say words that are a generalization. And I've always insisted you literally have to do this to imagine how reality might be and extrapolate things. And this is a very valuable thing to do if done, with responsibility. You don't assume that your generalizations are correct within reason. And when I confronted this person about this, they said, that's just the right thing to do. And they're invoking, you have to do this. I don't think I'm deciding to think this way, is kind of what they said. I think this just is the way to do this thing. But obviously, if you turn it around and say, okay, but other people consistently do a different thing, they would say, yeah, but that they're wrong to do that. And I would say, okay, but you don't think that you can't generalize. You just refuse to. You are physically capable of thinking of a generalization. You have to be to acknowledge that I'm making them, but you just refuse to invoke them logically. Yes, you have to say, obviously, you have to, that's logically required. Okay, so then that means that you know that you don't know how beneficial it is to generalize. Yeah, you do indeed. You don't have to agree, but that is logically true. You must not know that you don't know that it's effective to generalize. And so all of that means that you know that you don't have to think this way. You're choosing to. You can't but be choosing to. Now, obviously the point from before stands. You might change your mind about a subject like this and just not yet be done deconstructing the habit of thinking this way, sure. But in a lot of cases, my experience is that people have this kind of underlying conclusion, and they did, in a way, consciously choose to think this way, but they don't think that they did. They think that just is the way they think, or like is the way one thinks, like that people think. They don't realize that, no, it is a choice. You could just choose a different system, install different software and it's better. And that for many people, reality is the starting point. It doesn't mean the way you think by default is so bad or stupid, or that you're an idiot for not doing something different. But it would be equally foolish to suggest that you couldn't upgrade that thinking. You absolutely, obviously can. Why would you have, according to you, without really trying, it's just obvious, why would you, using that process, have essentially randomly hit upon the most optimal way to think? That's insane. Of course you haven't. And me having changed my thinking out a few times, of course I don't have the best possible one. I mean, maybe, but I don't know. Like, there's no reason to think I do. It's probably vastly inferior to something I'll think of in like 10 years, right? So I really like this one. I see what you mean, Mr. Fruit. This is pretty laser targeted for me and my interests. I definitely think that people go really far with this way of interpreting things, and it needs to be done with some 2 big grains of salt that I tried to discuss. But that overall, it's pretty effective, and that for a lot of people, acknowledging that there is this kind of underpinning way they do things, that maybe where a lot of their logic is coming from is, I will just briefly add, since I bragged about it being better to, set up a different way of thinking, that I do feel like there's a pattern. If your underlying way of thinking, the way you do anything, the way you do everything, is a way where you respond to everything with the same approach, instead of it being a way of doing everything where you think about everything using the same process, how you do anything, how you think about anything is the same, but the resulting actions can be different. Those ways of thinking are, I just would like to propose, tremendously beneficial, and that basically any way of doing everything that is an underlying philosophy that is like you actually act the same way about everything is almost guaranteed to be a massive waste of potential. And it would be really, really good if you had a way of doing things that didn't result in the same like output behavior from you. And instead, the thing that was the same is to get yourself to just think through things in a similar way, but that brings you to different conclusions. They're both anything is everything. Neither of them is like actually that more active, you could say. But I just think it's an advantageous habit, if you want to say it that way, to find a way of thinking that you agree with that results in different outputs, because usually that is warranted. Obviously, being, I don't know, aggressive or whatever about everything is going to be foolish a good amount of the time, no matter what your logical conclusion for doing that is. And so if there's a way that can be more adaptive, I think that helps. Do you have anything else to say about this one? I really liked this one. Um, yeah, I just thought it was really good, and I wish we had more quotes. Maybe we should do this one again. It was pretty fun. The anything is everything. I feel like we could go on for a lot longer, but I'd have to unpack it differently. Another way you could formulate it, but I don't think we have time for, is the idea that for a lot of people the problem holding them back is actually the same underlying thing, and that they have what they think are of as lots of problems in their life, but they're actually all quite possibly basically the same single thing. And that this is kind of unhelpful would be a thing I would add, because for a lot of people it's like, right, that thing is so massive that you can't, it might not be very easy to break it down that way. You don't have to change your life by changing the underlying thinking. How you do anything is how you do everything. Oh no, how I do everything is bad. I have to change how I do everything to change anything. Not necessarily. No. You can bootstrap thinking about everything differently piecemeal by chipping away at it a little bit. And again, that's another one of the big caveat things to that quote. A lot of people who are in the process of changing, they might not, for a brief window of time in their life, be doing everything the way they do any individual thing. But that just won't remain true for long for most people, I think. And I guess as a final closing note about these quotes, I also wanted to note that a lot of people are not trying to hack around with their life. And so most of these quotes are generally true for like the average person. They're not actively trying to shift their thinking. You can do that. A lot of people will insist that that's like not possible or something, and that everyone's the same deep down. You can never really change. But that's just obviously not true, in my opinion, if you spend any amount of time really exploring that. All the examples that appear to support the idea that people can't change are just people who didn't actually do the things that you would expect to actually make someone change. They were doing things that seem different on the surface, but were actually motivated by the same thing deep down. And they have not yet done something that is actually motivated by something different deep down. Thus, it appears that they've tried but can't change, but they actually kind of haven't tried in a way. It's no offense to them. I'm just saying they haven't done like the process that you would expect to lead to change. They tried their best, but that wasn't good enough. I'm saying it in an even more brutal way now. You know what I mean? It's not necessarily their fault, but just because they tried really hard and did the best they could, in no way is evidence that they couldn't have succeeded. They might just not have thought of the method that would make them succeed. And thus, a lot of these quotes hold very true, but only for people who aren't like trying to muck with them. And then the moment you do, like you can, suddenly it doesn't really work, you know. They're good generalizations. They're kind of dangerous generalizations because they apply to the people you would want the least of. The people that you will get the least out of, the people that are the least interesting, you know. Yes, it's true. But if you can find the people for whom that doesn't apply, ooh, that could really be something. That's a generalization too. There can be very, very interesting people who, for example, are interested in objectively pretty mediocre, but also somehow deeply compelling media. That can be so interesting to talk, I mean, with Bionic Me, with the people that are interested in such things. But as a generalization, I just feel like the how you do anything is how you do everything. It's like, but it would be fascinating to find the people for whom that doesn't hold true. They're not, you know, the exception as much as they're the one right in the quote, maybe noticing. I always wonder that when I hear these philosophical topics, like in a show, the show presents its thesis and they say, people never change. And it's like, but you, the writer, I mean, did you really think about that for a long time and conclude that people really can't change? Or do you just mean normally people can't change, but obviously like different people who wouldn't be relatable to the average audience, and so who I'm not covering in this piece of media, obviously can change. But I just know it's relatable to most people that you can't change because realistically they won't change. And so that's why I'm putting it in my media. Or do they really think, even after having thought through it, that people can't change? Because that they really can. I don't know. You really can though. It's not likely, and that doesn't sound as good. People never change. It is statistically unlikely that people will change. It doesn't roll off the tongue as well, but you see what I'm trying to say? There is something a little bit weird there. I've always kind of thought that about these quotes. It's like it's odd sometimes that people get far enough to maximify, quotify codify the thing that they're saying, but don't realize there's like a fairly obvious objection to it. And again, it's not just like saying the thing, that's understandable, but you see these pieces of media that are like a long thesis about the thing, and it's like, surely during this process it occurred to you that that's like not really true. And you just decided to keep saying it for some reason, or you're really in denial that it's not true, or you could disagree and you just do think it's true, of course. But it would be kind of insane if like almost everybody thought that. Surely some people agree with me that people can change. Yeah. Anyway, looking forward to the next one. Folks, if you'd like to participate in these Crew Parlay, I put up a new prompt for these every month, and it's at the $5 tier on my Patreon, which I give to people who are Twitch subscribers as well. So if you have Twitch Prime and you have your Discord and your Twitch connected, and you Twitch Prime sub my Twitch channel, you get this too. I treat that as the same. I get paid the same amount. I treat it as the same way. So if you'd like to participate in these, a lot of you listening have access to this already for free. So please use it. It's fun for me. I want you to do it. I'm not really trying to make more money off this $5 one. This is just here for value for the people that this is what people do pay me. And so I thought I should give people something, the $9 tier is really the like, maybe I can get the people that really like the thing I'm doing to sign up for $9 and do Parlay with me. But the $5 one is more like, hey, you all decided to pay me $5. Please have this. Like, and a lot of people have it and might enjoy using it and are not using it. So just so you know, you have that. And if you want to support the channel that way, obviously that's awesome. But I wanted this to be a reward for the large number of people who support me at this tier. So yeah, if you need help with that, please feel free to message me on Discord, or you can go in the description and either get that if you want to. Thanks for considering supporting the channel. Or, like get to it if you have it through the Discord link down there. Anyway, talk to you soon. Looking forward to the one next month.